Hello everybody, my name is Eric Wood and welcome to Aric Talks, where I talk about things that are important to me. Today is kind of a cool day because I officially got and I'm working through my ballot. Here in Oregon, we get our ballots in the mail and we mail them in. And so, yeah, because I finally have my ballot, I'm thinking a lot more than normal about the election. Because I am obsessing so much about the election for my own personal mental health, this video is going to have nothing to do with the election. So for those of you out there who are suffering from voters fatigue, which is a totally new concept which has never been experienced before in the United States and definitely hasn't existed since, George Washington decided not to run again, then consider this a gift to you. We are going to talk about politics that don't have to do with the presidential election. Well, all politics kind of have to do with the presidential election, but we won't be tying. Anyway, we're going for it. First thing I want to talk about today is something happening across the pond, the idea of an independent Scottish EU deal. Some people in Scotland wanted to be a separate country, so they held a referendum to remove themselves from the United Kingdom. That referendum failed, and democratically, the people of Scotland decided we want to remain in the United Kingdom. Now, fast forward, so the entire United Kingdom held a referendum to decide whether or not it was going to remove itself from the European Union. So you have Scotland, the UK, and the EU. Are you tracking so far? Now, the UK referendum to remove itself from the EU succeeded. So the United Kingdom in about 4 years is no longer going to be a member of the European Union, and that's significant. Now, since Scotland is still a part of the United Kingdom, but the United Kingdom is no longer a part of the European Union, Scotland wants to be a part of the European Union. Here's the layman's simple terms. Scotland wants to have a separate trade deal with the European Union. So yeah, in case you haven't figured it out yet, Britain has one of the most complicated economic systems in the world right now. Imagine for a second that the United States removed itself from NATO, but Texas was still a member of NATO. So how exactly would something like that work? How can a subunit of a nation be a member in a multinational organization? Well, according to the Scottish First Minister, basically the not Prime Minister of Scotland, I don't know, but we want it to happen. Philip Hammond, who is Chancellor of the Exchequer, which in American terms basically means that he is the Secretary of the Treasury, basically said that he cannot envision Scotland having a different relationship with Europe than the rest of the United Kingdom. And the First Minister, Nicola Sturgeon, basically said, well, yeah, I agree with you, but gosh dang it, we want it anyway. If this did happen and Scotland had a different relationship with the rest of Europe than the United Kingdom, it would make the British Islands one of the most complicated political and economic regions in the world. It's already pretty high up there, but even more so if this happens. So that's stuff that's happening outside of America. Inside of America, there's been a pretty significant domestic event that's been kind of ignored because of the presidential election. ITT Technical Institute just closed its doors. It is no longer a functioning school. Like seriously, the ITT Technical Institute has died. And the scary thing is that with the death of the ITT Technical Institute, so goes the education of everyone enrolled in that school. So here's the thing, ITT Technical Institute is a for-profit school. And if you've ever been watching TV on a weekday, you've probably seen one of their ads. Now, for-profit schools can be a good thing, but it's very rare. Basically what happened is that the federal government told ITT Technical Institute, look, you are not complying with federal guidelines. Here's what you need to change, and here's a timeline in which you can change them. And ITT Technical Institute's corporate leadership basically said, nah, we'd rather go bankrupt. Which financially makes a lot of sense. The changes that were being demanded would cost a lot of money that they did not want to spend because it would hurt their profit margin. The way ITT Technical Institute was making money was guaranteeing that everyone enrolled in their courses were taking the maximum amount of federal loans possible. So basically, ITT Technical Institute would force you into as much debt as possible so they could make as much money off of you as possible, and then you would graduate with a degree that wasn't that valuable to employers and crushing debt. So now, because the company decided that they would rather file for bankruptcy than comply with federal guidelines, everyone who was enrolled there is stuck because ITT Technical Institute's credits are non-transferable. If you go to to ITT and you get credits in a course, you cannot transfer those credits to a different university. So even the people who are literally a few months away from graduating with their degree won't get anything because of the negligence of this company. Just want to ask your guys' opinion on this. Are there any of you that go to a for-profit school? What's your experience with it? Do you like it? Do you think it's good? Or do you think it's a horrible experience? I would really be curious if any of you have experience with for-profit colleges and what your personal opinions are on that. I would be especially interested to hear if you went to ITT Technical Institute. Next up, in some slightly less political news, we are going to be talking about the Nintendo Switch, which, oh my gosh, just looks freaking cool. It looks cool and I want it. Everything about it looks pretty good. The hardware apparently is very powerful. The look of the design itself looks very convenient. Being able to, remove it from the console and carry it with you. And it also sounds like there's going to be a lot of independent developers signing on with Nintendo. Possibilities of even a Dark Soul game coming to the console, which is very exciting because Nintendo very rarely goes outside of Nintendo for their games. So diversifying the options for the games that you can play on the console is kind of a big deal. We still, however, don't know how much it costs, which is kind of a significant thing. It's just basic advertising. If you want someone to buy something, you tell it what it is, what it does, and how much it costs. So far, we know what it is, we know a little bit of what it does, but we don't know how much it costs. So Nintendo, get on that. Give us a $sign. Good Lord, I sound like such an American right now. All right, that about wraps up the news portion of the show. Now it's time to think deep. So today I want to talk about something that means a lot to me and that I think about a lot. And that thing is the national debt. Let's take a quick look at that, shall we? Confused yet? Well, don't worry about that. We're gonna break it down. Really, the big number that you gotta know is this one. Right now, the United States of America is in about $19 trillion in debt, which is absolutely huge. But the size of numbers very rarely matter. What matter is the context. And so today what I wanna ask is, who owns our national debt? Now, a lot of you guys are probably thinking, well, China, of course. Well, that's not actually true. So when you're asking the question, who owns the American national debt? The simple fact of the matter is that it's mostly Americans. The US public debt is mostly controlled by 3 different groups who conveniently control about 1/3 of the debt each. The first and single largest group is American individuals and institutions. Chances are, if you live in America, you own a US Treasury bond. That is, in a sense, national debt. So if you own a $50 US bond, you own a little over $50 worth of the United States national debt. The next group that controls 1/3 of the United States public debt is the United States government itself. Now, this is a little bit confusing, but basically the idea is that the United States government can borrow money from itself. Specifically, specific agencies can borrow money from different specific agencies. So the United States Social Security Trust Fund might borrow some money from the Civil Service Retirement Fund, and the United States Military Retirement Fund might borrow some money from the US Federal Reserve. But the important lesson to learn from that is that between United States individuals and institutions and interagency borrowing, the vast majority of American debt is controlled by America. The third group that controls American debt, and honestly probably the scariest group that controls American debt, is foreign nations. China controls about 8% of the United States debt, Japan controls about 7% of the debt, and everybody else controls anywhere between 0.5 to 1% of the national debt. That's all good to know, and yeah, it's kind of comforting to know that the majority of the United States debt is controlled by Americans, but $19 trillion is still a lot, and a lot of people ask the question, and rightfully so, how is America still solvent with $19 trillion worth of debt? And why aren't there a bunch of people sending mercenary accountants to tell America, hey, pay up? Well, the simple answer is that that's not how debt works. Basically, what's happening here is that the United States pays its debts. Now, this might begin sounding like a bad thing, but it's actually a pretty good thing. The United States has actually borrowed a lot more than $19 trillion. The reason that our number is at $19 trillion right now is that we've paid our former debts, and we've just decided to take on more debt. There's a constant coming and going. It's basically the same idea as if you went into a bank and saying, hey, I would like $1,000 loan. And then at the end of the week, you come in, they pay off the $1,000 plus interest, and then they say, hey, I would like a loan for $2,000. And then they just keep on doing this process over and over and over again. The bank will continue to give the United States money because the United States has an awesome credit score. We have proven that we consistently pay the money that we owe. And so when we come asking for more of it, countries and individuals and institutions are going to say yes because the United States of America is a great investment. So this idea all kind of gets distilled to what's referred to as the debt to GDP ratio. How much debt do you have versus what is your country's economic output? The goal of good fiscal governments is to have a balance. Your GDP ratio is as high as you can get it, and then your debt kind of matches your GDP ratio. However, what gets scary is that if your GDP ratio suddenly drops, it's hard to justify this much debt. Cool. I just want to make this incredibly clear. The United States national debt is a huge problem. But the problem isn't coming from our inability to pay off our debts. We are paying off our debts. We pay off our debts every single day. The problem is that if we were to pay off our national debt and not take on any new national debt, our government wouldn't be able to do what we like governments to do. We wouldn't have Medicare, we wouldn't have Social Security, and we probably wouldn't have a standing army. The solution to solving the United States national debt crisis actually has very little to do with actually paying off our national debt. The real problem, and ultimately the real solution, lies in building a federal budget that isn't completely dependent on borrowed money. It is very easy when thinking about the national debt crisis to completely forget the ideas of a federal budget, or completely forget the idea that the health of our economy is actually dependent on our gross domestic product, not on how much debt we're in. The United States federal debt problem is a solvable problem if we can just have a responsible budget and stimulate a growing economy. But that's an issue that requires people to be proactive, not reactionary, which is kind of hard for us to do right now. Anyway, that's all the time we have for today. Thank you so much for watching. You are a beautiful human being. Try to change the world today. And as always, sincerely yours, Aric Wood. Your tax laws are stupid. And Ireland is like, no, our tax laws aren't stupid. You're stupid. Next up, we have our old friend Brazil. You have your phones blowing up. You have lawsuits out the wazoo. How are you still a company? I am calling it. We have entered a new golden age. And it will be remembered as the age of Pokemon Go, in which the sun always shined, and the women were more beautiful, and the men more brave, and everything was perfect. Hopefully.